This video is about the south wall now, the entire south wall of the antechamber. Now, in order to put this into the larger context, I have to give you a little bit of a tour through the interior layout and just say a few words about the how the texts and the architecture are related, so that you understand the overall idea of the pyramid texts. And this is, of course, my interpretation of it. Other people may disagree with it. I'm trying to follow as closely as I can with the translations, but the added information that I'm using is the topography of the text and how the texts are laid out. And with that additional information, I think I am able to give an extra amount of interpretive information in terms of what the goal is of the pyramid text. And there may even be an explanation for a paradox that Egyptologists have been confronted with. So in order to do all of that, I have to take you through the pyramid real quick. And so we're going to go back to the virtual UNAS. And I will immediately show you where the paradox is. So we've come now into the antechamber from the entry, which is here on the north side. And to give you an idea what the problem is that Egyptologists are faced with, that you really have, the pyramid texts are really sending unas in two different directions. And that's not just unas, I'm talking about all the kings and queens for who we have pyramid texts in. And so this paradox has to do with the question: where was Unas headed for? Was he headed to the east with the sun, with the planets, and then rise and set across the ecliptic, and then be resurrected every single day, or was the goal to go to the north and become immortalized, basically where the immortal stars are? The immortal stars were the stars that never set below the horizon. They are called the circumpolar stars, and they revolve around the celestial North Pole. And so that is, you could think of that as immortality, because there's no dying and resurrecting. But in the East, with the ecliptic, you have dying in the West and then resurrecting in the netherworld and then coming back in the East. So these are two different types of concepts, and the texts are not per se not clear about, or at least we don't understand, or the Egyptologists have not been able to completely settle this issue. What really is the purpose now? And to put this into an architectural context, in this corner over here, this is the east wall, and this is the end of the text that cover the east wall. We really kind of have an end to one part of this journey, which is the east. But then we also have the north wall, and the north wall is distinct from the rest. It has to do with the reading direction, the way the symbols are facing. So even in that sense, the north wall is special. And the last symbol on the north wall is right here. And then the texts continue on into the passageway here, and they end over here on the east wall of the passageway. And I might as well go in there so you can see it. So the last symbol is over here. So the architecture is basically sending unas to the north, just as the texts are read. And this is from the north wall and then headed into the entry. But the other journey that comes across the walls like this is the south wall, then it goes to the east wall before it goes to the gable. And then the texts have an ending over here, and that is then a journey that goes to the east. So we have this paradox, and what I'm going to try to do is to give you an explanation that anyways makes sense to me why this may actually not be a paradox. But all good insights start with a paradox. So when you have a paradox, it's always an opportunity to learn something new. And so this is what I want to show you today. So let me now go back here and take you on a brief tour. So you see the entire architecture. So those stairs there, that's from the outside. You can see the the light of the day coming in. And then this is a horizontal passage. There's the portcullises. This is all lined with granite. You come into the antechamber through this passage, which is now lined with limestone, and here's where the texts were. This is the antechamber. We're looking at the south wall. This is the focus. The entire south wall is the focus of today's presentation. To the left is the east wall. There's the west wall. Then here we have, to the left, we have the serdap. This is not inscribed. There are 3 alcoves in here, and we can't go in here through the virtual pyramid. It basically ends right here, but there's basically 3 spaces. Then this is the connecting corridor that goes to the sarcophagus chamber. And so let's go into the sarcophagus chamber. There's the sarcophagus. Here is the west gable. On the other side is the east gable. On the other side is the east gable. This is the north wall of the sarcophagus chamber. The texts here are divided into 3 registers. This is the only place where you have that. This is the east wall of the sarcophagus chamber, and this is the south wall. So now, what about the logic of the pyramid text? So the pyramid texts really begin, and this is something that you have to keep in mind when you look at the utterance numbers, or these are setes, chord setes utterances, or the pyramid text numbers are not really in sequence. To some degree they are, but the logical sequence is not quite the same. So the pyramid texts really begin on the west gable of the sarcophagus chamber, and you can think in general of the gables as magic training, magic spells. And when I say magic, in today's lexicon, magic has sort of a conjurer, a magician sort of context. You know, it has to do with entertainment a little bit. We understand magic as something, oh my God, it's entertaining and all that. But it's not really a good way to understand what Egyptian magic, which is Heka, meant to the ancient Egyptians. It actually has to do with creation. It is very similar to what we would call logos. So logos means the word. And in Abrahamic religions, for example, logos is the act of creation. So creation occurs by intellectually conceiving the idea and then pronouncing it. And by doing that, God creates the universe, the world, humans, animals, plants, and everything. This is how Abrahamic religions kind of explain it. And this goes against idol worship, basically. So you're not supposed to worship anything, any object. The essence of God is really the word, the idea, and creation by utterance. And so magic, Egyptian magic, Heka, is kind of the same thing. They, to them, creation was through the word. And what this whole idea of the pyramid text is all about is by basically trying to reenact creation, that the king or the queen can then come back to life from death. And the idea of Heka is that there are obstacles in the afterlife. Obviously, it's not easy to come back to life, and the only way to do it is by overcoming the trials and tribulations, and the way you do that is with Heka magic. And so anyways, it's a long way to say a simple thing, mainly that these gables are about magic training, and that you learn a certain way of speaking in order to be able to make it. So this is how the pyramid texts begin, as the dead, the deceased enters the afterworld, the netherworld. This is the 5th hour of the netherworld, so to speak, for where resurrection occurs. And in order to enter this treacherous place, this dangerous place, you have to be equipped with magic. And it begins right here on the west gable. So then now I have to alert you, this is my interpretation, is that on the north side, what happens is, this is how the Ka of the deceased resurrects. The Ka is basically the life force. So in essence, all of this has to do with the mummy. It has to do with food, with drink, with the mouth opening ritual, for example, is over here. So this is about reviving the life force. while the other side, which is the south wall, is about reviving the soul, the Ba, and this entire revival, this resurrection, extends all the way across even the east wall of the sarcophagus chamber, all the way to approximately over here, while the Ka resurrection here on the north wall extends to a little bit of the east wall, and then it continues into this corridor, and it ends at the end of this corridor wall on the south side. So this is where actually the offering ritual ends, while the resurrection ritual, which is written here on the south wall and extends to the east wall, ends just about right here in this northern aspect of the east wall. Here on the gable is written the response to the offering ritual. So this is basically the resurrected Ka life force of the king responding, accepting the offerings. And then, so what now happens is that you have a resurrected Ba, the soul, and you have a resurrected Ka, and they now come to the other side. So we're leaving now the netherworld, the Duat, and we're entering what's called the Achet. So the antechamber can be thought of as a recreation of the horizon, the active part of the horizon, which is sort of the area of the sky that's on fire before the sun rises. So the ancient Egyptians thought that this is a special incubation chamber where an equipped soul can resurrect. And so we are now in this Achet chamber, the antechamber that is. And now here again we have the Ka and the Ba. So let me roughly divide this wall here, which is the west one. So we've just left, and this wall, which is the west wall of the antechamber, is almost exactly divided into half by text that has to do with the Ka on this side, the northern side, and it has to do with the Ba, the bird aspect here on the southern side. And the division is just about through the center, not exactly, but almost exactly. What you have above here is, this is the west gable of the antechamber, and these are magic spells to assist in leaving the netherworld, the Duat, which is where we just came from. So in order to get out of here, you also need magic, and that magic is written up here. And then you have basically the Ka and the Ba, and they unite now to become Ach, which is the equipped spirit, the symbolized with the ibis. And we talked about this in the other video, that Hor-Machet and Horachti are basically names that relate to this, that have this spirit incorporated into them. So this is now the south wall, and this south wall, as I mentioned, has to do with the astronomy of the journey now, where the Ka and the Ba travel together for a certain amount of time and through a certain amount of space. And this is on the ecliptic. And we're going to get into that in a moment when I show you the sky. But just to summarize right now, this is basically that journey where they travel together. But then what we will see here is, and this is, again, I have to alert you, this is my interpretation, that the Ka and the Ba then split up because they are destined for different parts of the sky. And I will mention this when we get back to discussing this wall. So what happens then is, this is basically the synopsis here of this journey, and then the details of it are on the second part of the wall. And then here, the text continue onto the eastern wall of the text actually continue on the eastern gable, which is now the magic required to perform this journey, basically, to make it through the Achet, to make it through the horizon, and then to emerge into the sky. And so this is the famous cannibal hymn, because this is probably the richest, in the way I'm reading it, the richest magic training camp in the entire pyramid text. So Here is where Unas basically acquires all this magic. And the metaphor for that is eating it. So he's basically eating gods, eating humans, and it's a metaphor for basically acquiring, learning the magic that he needs. Then the magic is applied, and this is sort of applied magic on this wall. There's several phrases here where you can literally learn how Heka magic is performed. The wall basically teaches you how it was done. And then here is what I was discussing a few days ago in the cavern video, where you go through now the original primordial cave of creation in order to pass through it and to apply this magic just like it was applied in original creation, so that the spirit of Una, the divided spirit back now into Ka and Ba, can ascend into the sky, because it's the ultimate goal of the whole process, of course, is to go into the sky. And I think the paradox can be explained by the idea that the Ka basically goes to the east with the sun and will continuously have to resurrect. It will be resurrected, travel with the sun through the ecliptic, and then die. It has to be continuously fed. And that explains maybe why the ancient Egyptians had food offerings continuously supplied. This was an important thing for the afterlife, that the Ka is continuously fed, initially with real offerings, and then sort of more symbolic offerings that could be symbolized, because I'm sure it was getting expensive after a while to have to keep burning food and leave it at the place of rest. And so this could be where the Ka eventually goes to the east. And then here on this wall, which is the northern wall, is where what happens to the Ba. And the Ba is, of course, the bird, the falcon. And this wall is clearly set apart because the reading direction is, the symbols are facing this way, but you're actually reading it also in the same way. So you're going backwards as you're reading the text. And this is the only wall where this happens. So there's a unique character about this. And I don't have time to explain this. There's a fascinating explanation I may have to do with how the sky rotates, why this is different. The moon obviously plays a role here. But I don't want to explain this today because it's a little bit of a lengthy explanation, but suffice it to say that this wall is unique in terms of the way it's written. This starts, for example, with the heliacal rising of Sirius, and then this ends with the red crown, and the red crown in my reconstruction is in the northern sky zone, which is where the Ba eventually goes. The birds fly to the north, to the zone of immortality, and the final stretch of that journey is here in the where we came in, the entry passage, and it ends here on the eastern wall of the entry passage. Okay, so this is the general idea of the pyramid texts. I think this is important for orientation when we pick any given wall. And now let's go to the details. So I'm going to close this and show you the sky again before we go to the southern wall. So remember that the Duat, the netherworld, is here on the west bank of the Milky Way, and the Achet is here on the east bank. And in Unas's time, in the Old Kingdom, later Old Kingdom, the summer solstice sun arose into the constellation Leo. And if you remember, Robert Bouval proposed that Horachdi, which is explicitly mentioned in the pyramid text, unlike Horamachet, which is only cryptically potentially mentioned, and I got into this last time, but Horachdi may be a reference to the Sphinx in the sky, which is the constellation Leo. And so this could be a real journey in the sky. And so the southern wall, which is, of course, matching the fact that the ecliptic arches across the south. So this is, the wall is facing the part of the sky that it's talking about. And specifically, the journey that I was referring to is the rising of Sirius. That's the Ach spirit, the combined Ka and Ba. It rises on the west bank of the Milky Way, all the way to the ecliptic. It takes the moon ferry across in order to reach the sun and Horachti. And so this is now what I am going to show you on the wall. So I have in order to stay oriented, I have 2 copies of this. This is just a regular photo image, and I'm going to leave this here for orientation, but I'm going to magnify this to show you the details. But I'm going to leave this up here as to stay overall oriented. So this is the south wall of the antechamber. What I discussed in the previous videos is the first 8 columns, and then I took it all the way over to Pyramid Text 263, which is where the idea of the moon ferry, or the idea of the reed floats that are crossing the Milky Way, where I got into this. I was showing you the connection between Horachti and a cryptic version of Horemachet. And then there's a few other little things, for example, the idea of the lightnings, the storm, the hail, that might be a metaphor for the Milky Way. This was all in this initial section. And now when you look at the second part, the eastern part of the southern wall, then what you realize is that these are now the details of what was summarized here in the first part. So the way I am interpreting is that this is the synopsis of the entire journey, and then the journey is now explained in its details in the second part. And it's maybe not the only way that you could read it, but that's maybe one way that you could read it. And the reason why I'm thinking that this is what's going on is because there's some repetition. There's some, the same ideas that are mentioned here reoccur on this side, but there's more detail so that the mechanism by which this journey occurs is made more clear. Okay, so now let me show you a few more details that I didn't mention last time. So in order to do that, I'm going to zoom in now and show them to you. Yeah, so, and you always have this here to compare to, and I'm going to try to remember to cross point so you know where I am. So this is obviously PT's 261, and that's over here. So I want to, the key, one of the major findings, in my opinion, in terms of topography, is this connection between Horachti, which has the ibis here, with a horizontally connected, even though there's all this intervening text. So you wouldn't immediately think that there is a connection, but it's topographically placed in a fascinating way that it's almost like it's by design, because you have the ibis here, you have the ibis here, and it's almost perfectly horizontally across. And here you can reconstruct Horemachet, which is Horus in the horizon, which is the name of the statue in the New Kingdom. But we don't have any evidence for this name in the Old Kingdom, but I think there is a cryptic reference to it. I already mentioned this in the last video or a couple of videos ago, that the reason maybe why the statue was not to be named is that it was desecrated by putting a human head on it. And of course, this is part of the model that says that there was a statue there before. The Egyptologists will not agree with this because they say the Sphinx was created from scratch. They would not see a reason why the statue would be considered desecrated, because they would say Khafre built it as such. But of course, I am challenging that model. And so from the model that that myself and others have proposed, including Robert Bouval, Graham Hancock, Robert Schoch, John Anthony West, and others, we think there was a statue there before. And within that context of that model, it makes perfect sense why the statue may not have been allowed to be mentioned, because it was desecrated. But the memory of this event, in fact, and especially the memory of the prior statue, there would have been some that would have wanted to keep that memory intact so that it does not get erased by decree from the royal house. And so this is a brief summary of what I was mentioning before. So that is why Horem Achet is only cryptically mentioned here using, sort of a hidden way to say it, Heru em Achti, or Achi. And so this was the interesting connection, and to support this idea that there's a connection is this horizontal connection between the two achs. So that's the first thing. Now, since that presentation, I found something else which is also supportive of the idea, because there is another mention of Horachti over here, and if you look at, there is a connection here as well with the lion symbol. The lion symbol is officially, you would say this is phonetic, it's Ru. So I Ru means the form, and Ma'al means the true. So the true form. And remember this phrase, of course, it's not talking about Horem Achet ostensibly, it's talking about that it says Unas will emerge in this, on this day, Heru Pen, this day, in the true form of an Ach spirit, okay? And by the way, this is the textual evidence that now we have Ka and Ba combined as we begin on the south wall. But I just wanted to point out this here again, we have another confirmation that there's a connection between the Ach from Horachti, this the second instance of it, straight across with the sitting lion. It's another clue, and it goes right through Jehuti, which is Thoth. And of course, Thoth has a connection because of riding with the lioness Mehit that was guarding the rider's tent, and that was associated with writing and archiving in the early dynastic phase. So see, there's all these clues, and what I keep finding is that you don't usually have just one clue. The clues double and triple stitch, so there's multiple ways that to make you see it. And so that might be a good standard to keep in mind, that if you have a suspicion maybe that there may be an insinuation that the author wanted you to think about something even though the author didn't mention it explicitly, then the author will understand, of course, that you will not be convinced unless you have a double and a triple stitch. In other words, there's more than just one piece of evidence that takes you to that place that cannot be explicitly mentioned. Okay, so this is further evidence of this idea that the topography is underlying potentially a new message that we didn't appreciate before. Now, the other thing that I had mentioned last time, and I think I put this in the notes under the last video, is that this line goes through actually the lioness head. The lioness head is not a commonly used symbol, but in this case, it was determining this word, which is azeb, and azeb had to do with glowing, glimmering. And I think one interpretation is that this may be, this was meant to mean a spark. So this is basically a spark of Ayahu, light, and that relates to potentially the star Sirius as it cuts through the morning sky when it just arises above the horizon. Now, there is another instance of this symbol, and it's over here, and that's why I made a connecting line. And this has to do now talking about the Ka of Unas. So here's Unas, there's the Ka, his living Ka. And Unas is now presenting himself in with the Ba, and in this case, the Ba is spelled with the lioness head, and this symbol here, which has to do with the fur coat. So it's basically the skin of a leopard or a lioness, and he's wearing it, and that becomes an insignia, so to speak, of his, an insignium rather, an insignium of his Ba, and that Ba goes back to this idea of a lioness and the spark. So so I just wanted to point out, and that this has to do, there's the Ka, and then here is this particular this coat, and of course you see the shamans in Egyptian art wearing a leopard coat, and it's symbolic of the sky, the stars, and so this is an interesting connection. The other thing I mentioned last time is this topography of the rising of of what you see in this, basically the rising up along places in the sky, and especially these four places, because there's Jehuti, which is the moon, there's Sopdet, which is the star Sirius, there's the one in the Duat, which is probably Orion, and then we have Kapet, which is the bull in the sky, and that's most likely the constellation Taurus, and all of these are to the west of the Milky Way. The Milky Way itself is mentioned here, and so what I was trying to say is that this nicely topographically recapitulates that the spirit of the king is rising on the west bank of the Milky Way along all of these signs in the sky, these constellations and stars. And I think one explanation for these other two, the sun and the god, is, and I was struggling with this last time, but I found a way that you might be able to explain it. So the sun and the god, which could be Horachti actually, are thought to have traveled under the horizon across through the netherworld and then resurrect in the east, and that's why they're under this horizontal line connecting Hor Machet and Horachti. That's one way you could think of it. Just wanted to point this out. Okay, so now the next, I'm going to move this along. And now there's just a couple of things here in Pyramid 263, which I already went through, but there's just a couple of extra little clues that are interesting to note. I think last time I called the raft a canoe because this is ka and this is nu. It's kind of an interesting, there's a similarity, right, basically between hieroglyphic and even what you would say in English. A canoe is basically a small rowing boat. But the word is actually sechenu. Sechenu is the word, or sechenui is for the two sky boats, or the two reed boats, reed rafters. So I just wanted to make that little correction. And these are the rafters that are used to make this journey across the sky. So I wanted to point this out. The other thing is that the other thing I wanted to say is the fact that here there is a staff, is called the Medustar. So the Medu is in Unas's arm. Okay, so this is the Meduf, off means the staff in his arm, and then this here is the Obeth is in his Jeretef means his hand, and this again has interestingly has this Ba sign again in it. So you can see how the Ka and the Ba are represented again in terms of the insignia of the king, because you have the Medu, which is possibly representing the Ka, and then you have the Ba, which is another staff that he's holding in his hand, and that could be representative of his Ba. And remember, in this presentation, he's wearing the leopard coat. So Unas is basically showing himself as in the outfit of a shaman priest, of a Sem priest. So and then here I wanted to just point out again this topography. We have the Achu, which are the spirits mentioned here, and you see how nicely this again lines up with the Ach of the Horachti, and that lines up with the cryptic Hor Machet. So it's, again, this is what I'm talking about, triple stitching. So if there's any doubt maybe that these two Ach signs were not intentionally meant to be on one line, then the author, the composer, gives you yet another clue and creates this little symmetry here, this T-shaped symmetry that it makes it even more obvious that this horizontal line was intended. And to complete this picture, so the Acho here are basically the four spirits. Here's the number 4, the four spirits that are waiting for Unas on the east side of this journey on the destiny. These are the Semsu, so Semsu, the Ahu Semsu, and this gives me a little opportunity to maybe give you a little bit of hieroglyphic. There's a tiny amount. So this is S. This is folded cloth. It stands for the sound S. This is an owl. It stands for M. This is the reed, which stands for Su, and then this is a phonetic complement, meaning that it's explaining that this is meant to be said Su. So Sem Su means the elder. So I just want to emphasize that the images that you see have almost nothing to do with the language. It's phonetic. It's just like an alphabet where the symbols relate to the sound, not the actual, not the identity of the image that you're seeing. However, there is a relationship between the sound and the image that you're seeing, because, for example, the word for owl has the sound M in it, and so it's the dominant, usually consonant of the word that produces then the sound value of that symbol. So anyway, Semsu means elder, then Genti means the foremost, and then here's an interesting word. So for example, this is the Genti of the Henzeku, and the Henzeku are the beard. These are beards, basically. So beards is, of course, a sign of divinity. So these elderly Ahus are basically the foremost of the beard wearers on the east side. Again, you know, triple stitching this, so no doubt that this is about the east, because it's specifically mentioned here. The Ahau, that means the ones that are standing on the side of the east of the sky, right? So this is the sign for east. It means M, Gez, Ayabet, and Pet, and that means on the side east of the sky. Okay, so now what we're going to do is continue on where I left off last time. So we're going to talk about the rest of the south wall, and I'm going to just give you the big idea first, so that's an easier way to stay oriented. So if this is the synopsis, now here we get the details, and so we have pyramid text, but there is a gap here in terms of pyramid text numbers, and this is what I was talking about. The sequence not necessarily reflects the true the true sequence of the logic of the text. So it turns out that 264, 5, and 6 are present in other pyramids that came after Unas, but this is the original pyramid text version, and in Unas version, you don't have these intervening texts. And I should mention, some people might think that maybe Unas pyramid texts are incomplete, but there's one piece of evidence that supports the idea that the Unas pyramid texts are the original version and they are canonical, because in the Middle Kingdom, there were people that used the pyramid text in their own tombs and verbatim from the version that Unas has, not the versions that came after Unas. And that is also one reason why I'm focused on the original version, because my concern is if we look at other versions, then there may be already some corruption going on in terms of topography, in terms of extra text added, because once you add text, then of course the topography changes and you might shift things around. And so I didn't want to fall into that trap. So this is why I'm focused on the original version, which is the Unas version. So anyways, so we're going, the pyramid text 267 here, this is now basically reminding us that, like Osiris Unas, it's the Osirian theme of basically reconnecting the limbs, the pieces of the body. And this is now reminding us that Unas, just like Osiris, has basically collected his limbs. They're basically reattached. And here now is, again, there's this reminder that there's really two components to this Ach spirit, and this is the bird. which is the Abdu. It's over here. This is the Abdu, is the bird. And then there is the Ka, which I think is the one that rises in the east and sets in the west. And that's why this is associated with the Kheper, which is the beetle. So Egyptologists may not agree with this. So this is my interpretation. I have to, I have to always preface that I think my interpretation is that the components, the Ba and Ka, are accounted for throughout this whole journey, and they have their own associated language and context in terms of the sky. So I think the Kheper context is the ecliptic, and the bird context is the circumpolar star zone. So then now, in terms of the mechanics of the motion, so we get cleansing, washing, and then we get incense. And these are two rituals, the washing and the incense, that of course are recurrent themes. You can see it throughout Egyptian history. And here there are some interesting things about locations, which I'm going to go into in a moment. So this has to do with the washing of the body, and this has to do with the incense. So the Ka is basically the body is washed, the Ka is purified through libation, and then the Ka is sent into the sky through incense. And so that's what these two texts deal with. And then here in Pyramid 270, this is what I was talking about before, the moon fairy. So here the ferryman is actually addressed, and the ferryman has a specific name that has to do with how the moon moves across the ecliptic during this phase. And so I'm going to get into that because that's really fascinating, how there was specific names for specific times of the lunar cycle. And then here in the end is the last two pyramid texts, 271, 272. This is basically now the moment when the actual resurrection occurs. The Ka rises in the summer solstice, and what happens, of course, in the summer solstice, you get the inundation. The two lands are reunited. Basically, there is fruitfulness. There's growth again, and the king becomes the uniter of the two lands. And so this is basically now describing the events that happen when you have the sun rise actually now. And then here is this last bit, has to do with the portal to the sky, the Erratum. It's written right here. It's again topographically perfectly placed in the upper corner where the Ka wants to go eventually. He wants to escape into the sky and make this journey that I was talking about. And that's why this portal, the name of the portal, is put, I think, right there in the upper corner. And this portal is also mentioned over here. And of course, the determinative of that portal, Erratum, is a corner sign. So it makes perfect sense. You have a corner sign here, and then you actually put the name, the portal itself, into the corner. So this is, again, another way for me to tell you is that topography of the text is very, very important. Another interesting clue about this portal is that it has the word Ru in it, which is, of course, the word for lion again. So so this is the big picture, and so now let me show you some of those details. And so we're going to focus first on. Let me show you something about 263, which is over here. So we're gonna go over to this area here in 263. Oh, there's 263, pyramid text 263. And remember, this is now talking about the Ka and the Ba separately. And here is something that I wanted to point out, because this is, I have to zoom in on that so you can see better. So here is an entity called Neheb Kau. Neheb Kau is the Ka assigner. So this is an interesting concept because the Ka has to always come back to the Ba in order for the Ba to stay alive, and so for the two to combine, remain and Ach, and remain alive in the sky, right? So this Ka assigner, there's one way that you can, and this Ka assigner is waiting on the east side of the journey. So one way that you can explain this is that, let me go to the sky, that the Ka assigner is sitting over here, and here you have the northern sky zone. It's over here. Here are the circumpolar stars. Okay, there's Draco. There's the Small Dipper, and in my reconstruction, by the way, this is the red crown. And there is some textual evidence for this, which I'm going to show you in a moment. The horn here is mentioned in the pyramid texts of the south wall. So you have basically the northern sky, which is rotating counterclockwise, and then you have the ecliptic, which appears to be rotating clockwise. Of course, it's the Earth that's turning, but if you didn't know that, you would think that you have basically this clockwise, that the sky is turning in a clockwise direction. And so the Ka, the Neheb-Kau, could be the entity that is somewhere in this zone, and that assigns the Ka as a resurrect back to the Ba that's immortalized and turning around the north. So you have this cycle and you have this cycle, and the Neheb-Kau is basically the Ka assigner that keeps combining Ka and Ba to keep the spirit going, the Ach spirit. So this is one way that you might be able to interpret. This is my interpretation. I don't think that Egyptologists have pronounced this ever before, and they may disagree with me. But so again, I would just want to make sure that you understand that this is something that I am coming up with. Now, so here's Neheb-Kau, and then we have I mentioned the east side, so I'm just going to go down the column here. The next one is a cryptic mention of Mehit. Now, the translation, of course, does not say Mehit the lioness, it says northern, and what specifically this is referring to is the northern Sechet 2, which means the northern marshes. The northern marshes, Ayaru, are the fields of reeds. So the northern fields, Sechet 2, Ayaru, are the northern fields of reeds. But the interesting thing is usually this is just called the field of reeds. It's not plural, the fields of reeds. So I saw that and I thought to myself, well, this is kind of an interesting clue again, that this is a little bit out of place here. Because why not just say what usually is said, which is the Sechet Ayaru, which is the field of reeds. So where is the field of reeds? I have to go back to orient you in that respect. So the field of reeds is basically where Orion is, where Osiris is. And you could even think of it as the entire zone that's below the ecliptic. And of course, the ultimate goal later is to cross the ecliptic and get to the northern zone. And that's what the Ba ends up doing. And then once you're in the circumpolar zone, or let's say after you cross the ecliptic and you're just under the circumpolar zone, then you're in the field of offerings. So the field of reeds is supposedly, it could be conceived as under the ecliptic, the field of offerings is above the ecliptic, and then you have the northern star zone of the imperishable stars. So there's really only one field of reeds, and so I thought it was interesting that there is a interesting, unusual specification that we're in the northern fields, and it's plural because it's more than one. There's 3 signs, so it's plural. Now, see, this is what I was saying. You could say, well, this is just a coincidence, or it's a little bit of a peculiarity. And remember what I said, the standard is there's got to be a double stitch. There's got to be another place that will explain to you or give you extra evidence that no, this was meant to say what you are suspecting it is said, which is an insinuation of Mehit, the lioness in this case, and not the word for north. And that double stitch is here. So here you have the same reference. It says Sechet Ayaru, but you don't have the word north. And even so, if you go to the bottom of column 30, you don't have the word mehit, you have the word ja, which means to cross, right? So you have this unas, to give you the full context, this unas, it usually, Egyptian sentences typically start with the predicate, so we have to go, unas is the subject of the sentence, so here's the predicate. Sechem means to lead in this case, so lead unas, this unas, so this unas shall lead, or yeah, shall lead. Aichemu Sekayu are the imperishable stars. Aichemu Sekayu. So he shall lead the imperishable stars, and he shall cross Ja, the Sechetut Ayaru, the fields of reeds. So see, there's no north here, but it is set over here. So that omission is supporting evidence that this word mehit is unique. And so I just wanted to, even if it's not what I think it might be, the technique is what really matters. I just wanted to show you the enigmatic writing, the Heka technique, that the author is not trying to hide it. Actually, he's trying to say it without saying it. And the author understands that in order to convince the reader, extra evidence is needed, and that extra evidence is often provided. And there's more examples like that on the other walls, which I will present in another video. So this was part of this is part of Pyramid Text 263, and I think that is there's one more thing I wanted to mention. The journey, if you remember, that the evidence that this journey eventually then continues on the Ecliptic, which is called the Merencha, is also there in writing. So again, it leaves no doubt that where this journey occurs, because the winding waterway is actually mentioned. So we have the northern marshes here mentioned, and then it says Ja Unas means he will cross in Mer en Cha, which is determined with this canal sign. So this is the winding waterway. So that is this is the Egyptian word for the Ecliptic. And the evidence for that is, it's a very long proof that was shown by Rolf Krauss, is a German Egyptologist and astronomer who wrote about this. And he, I wouldn't say that it is not contested. There's, I guess, some Egyptologists that are that have argued against that the Merencha is the winding waterway is the Ecliptic. But I've looked at the evidence, and to me, it's very convincing. I think Rolf Krauss is correct. And of course, this whole thing that I'm presenting here today is, it makes sense that this, in fact, is the Ecliptic. So anyways, so then here's just another piece of the evidence that this is going towards the east. So Ja Unas, this Unas will cross near the side of the east of the Achet, right? So that's where the journey is going. And here's this yet again. So double, triple stitch. So there's no doubt that where this is going. It's going to the east. And then it says Senetef, which is the sister. He's basically going towards his sister. And what is his sister? Well, it's Sobdet, which is the Canis Major. Some people think that Sobdet is the star Sirius, but I think if you look at Sobdu, Sobdet, that duality, I think Sobdet is Canis Major, and Sobdu is Sirius in Canis Major. I think that's probably still the best way to explain it. And that was not always the way it was explained, but if you look at the literature, I think there are people now that agree that Sobdet is really the entire constellation, while Sobdu is the star itself. It's not uncontested. Some people will argue with that, but that's okay. I just wanted to, you can decide for yourself, but I just wanted to point out that Sobdet is feminine. Sobdu is also mentioned, and that's the male aspect. And I think that is the star Sirius. And then here is a mention of Duat, which is not the netherworld, but in this case, this is actually a star. So the Medutef is basically, or Mesethutef means his, is basic, another word for saying sister, and this is now the morning star. So Duat is the morning star, and it's interesting that the morning star, you don't always see that, of course, here in all the views, but let me see if we have Venus. Yeah, there's Venus. So Venus is the morning star, and of course Venus is in commonly seen for a large part of the synodic Venus cycle in the east, and that again is supporting evidence that this journey is towards the east where Venus is sitting, which is the name for Venus is Duat in this case. All right, so let's get back to detail. So now we get to Pyramid 267. Pyramid 267, remember, this is now the identification with, it's basically saying that Unas is like Osiris. He has now collected his limbs, and this is, of course, the Osirian theme. Osiris was hacked to pieces by Seth, and then Isis came and with Anubis, and they basically put him back together. And that is, of course, what mummification is symbolizing. Basically, you're making a statue out of the dead person that you can preserve, and then you feed that statue to reanimate it, to revive it, and that's the Ka aspect of this. So, so here it says, for example, Ibek Enek Wasir, so your heart to you, Osiris. Then it says your legs to you, Osiris. Your arms to you, Osiris, and then it says the same thing about Unas. But here is now again something that supports the idea of a pathway up into the sky. So, for example, here it says Sepet means to put down, to place for him a ta redui erpet, which means a footpath into the sky. And if you remember, there was another mention of this here earlier on. It was that the ascent here, I think it's over here, ayot, and heret means an ascent to above. And here it's again mentioned, so that there's no doubt about what we're talking about. It's a footpath up into the sky. And in terms of the astronomy, I think that footpath is right up here on the west bank of the Milky Way. So, so this is mentioned here now, and then we have, and now here's now the mechanism. So this is what I was saying, that the second half is explaining more detail how the mechanism of this journey, how does this journey actually occur? And it says now, it says heret and heret, nedet, uret. Okay, so that means basically that the ascent happens on the smoke, the great smoke. And now this takes us to incense. So remember, we have libation and we have incense, and that's what pyramid text 2, make sure I say this correctly, center the incense idea. Yeah, the incense is mentioned in 269, and the washing is 268, and right now we're in 267. So in 267, it's basically telling us how this will happen. So the washing of the Ka, the purification, and then the sending the Ka up into the sky will happen on a smoke cloud, basically, of incense. And that's what this basically says here. So it's explaining to us how this actually happens. And then here's what I meant. There's the components of the spirit, which is the Abdu, the bird. The bird will fly, and the Ka will rise like the beetle. Okay, so now let's talk about the details of pyramid text 268. There's not too many, but there's basically not too many that are necessarily of interest here. But there's one other thing I forgot to say about 267, and that's the word for killed, which is here shenjut, And there's an interesting determinative. So this is the pyramid-shaped kilt that Unas is going to leave behind, along with his wife, apparently, because his wife is also mentioned. So as he ascends into the sky, he's leaving his humanizing aspects behind on Earth. Okay, so here's 268, and now this has to do with washing the Ka. And the reason why, there's a couple of points here that are interesting in terms of the location where all of this is happening. So here, for example, is another mention of the white crown, the Urret. Okay, and so what I think is the Urret again goes with the Ka, while the net or the Desheret, the red crown, goes with the Ba. And so the Urret is mentioned here. It's also mentioned on the east wall, by the way. But this on the what we have here on this entire wall is the synopsis of the whole thing. And so the red crown is also mentioned here, and in fact the horn of the red crown is mentioned. So we're going to get into that in a moment. So here's the white crown mentioned, and then going down the columns, I'm just gonna go down so I don't leave anything out. And so here now, yeah, here is, it says this Unas. So he's going to be washed in this lake of the jackal. I wanted to highlight this because, of course, Robert Temple thought that the Sphinx was a jackal, and he had some pretty good evidence based on the pyramid text. It wasn't a baseless claim. I think he did a good job with this book. I don't think he's correct, because there's actually falsifying evidence that it was not a jackal. But I just wanted to point out why he thought so. And so the lake of the jackal, he interpreted that to be the moat. He thought that the ditch around the Sphinx is a moat, and he thought that the lake of the jackal is that moat. We don't have to get into the pros and cons, and Robert Schoch has, of course, already has countered that argument, so I don't have to get into that. But I just wanted to point out that this is one mention of this lake of jackal, but there is another lake, and this gives us an idea maybe that this is still in the underworld, in the netherworld. It's not above ground; it's in the underworld. So the lake of jackal, and then we have also the lake of the Duat, the She Duati. So the She Duati and the She Zab are probably both still in the underworld, and so this would be under the Sphinx. So I think there is a way that Robert Temple could be correct, and Robert Schoch could be correct, that the Sphinx was really a lion, and of course we think that she was a lioness. And underneath the Sphinx, where the netherworld is, there is an aspect of the jackal, and that aspect may have something to do with the secrecy, with the cavern, with the original cavern of creation. It may be related to that this lake is really in the underworld. And so maybe there's a way that you could combine the two theories without necessarily saying that one is wrong and the other one is right. Okay, I highlighted a few more instances of Ka. So it gives you the idea that this is really about the Ka. The Ka is being purified, washed, and cleared of the flesh. And so this has really a mummification context here. There's the jackal, of course. So this is basically a preparation of the corpse, the dead person, for mummification so that it can revive. And here's another location. That's why I highlighted it. So this is the Great Enclosure. The Hut O'a Uret is the Great Enclosure. So this is also happening in the underworld. So where is this Great Enclosure? Of course, we don't know. But I just wanted to point out that there are specific locations that may have underground representations. It is possible. Could this be a representation of the Sphinx ditch, for example, the Great Enclosure? I have no idea. I'm just mentioning it so you can judge for yourself. Then here now is what will happen after the cleansing has occurred. Then, of course, if you remember, the incense will carry up the Ka of Unas into the sky, and it will go through the Ara root, which is the portal. And this must be a portal into the sky. And that portal is determined with these corner signs. And of course, up here in the corner, I mentioned, maybe I'll show it to you over here. There is that very word, arut, and it is placed into the it's into the upper left corner, which is that would be, I guess, the north. It would be the north, sorry, the southeast corner of this wall. Okay, and so now the next interesting word here is this, the hemathet, which is the coil that's sitting on the red crown. So he will tie on this, there's he will tie on for himself, the coil shall be tied on to him, and this is the coil of the red crown, and then he will lead the imperishable star. So remember, this is synopsis. So I think what this is saying is once he reaches the east, the Ach reaches the east, then we have this, then what will happen is that the Ba and the Ka will separate, or alternatively, the Ba has its own journey. I don't know which one it is. But this aspect of Unas will then tie on the red crown, the horn of the red crown, and then lead the imperishable stars, which are in the northern, in the peripolar zone, where the celestial North Pole is. We already talked about the field of reeds. So this concludes pyramid text. This concludes pyramid text 268. And now that was, remember, libation. Now we're going to talk about incense. So we're going to make a fire and put some incense over it so that it ascends into the sky. And so this is the mechanism by which the Ka is supposed to ascend. And so let's look at that, how this is done in detail. So it says, so Jet Medu means words to be spoken, and then Dai means place, or set. Sejet means fire. Sejet uben, so that shall rise. Uben. Sejet, so that shall rise the fire, the great fire. I think this is an Ur sign, the great fire. So this is a sacred fire, a sacred flame. And then here is senether. Senether is the word for incense. And it's beautiful how the godly sign, the natural power sign is used to spell this word, because it basically identifies the presence of the gods as a scent. And we even use that word in English, scent and senether, of course, linguistically related. And so place the incense heres on the fire, on sejet, and so that shall rise the great incense. Okay, and then what happens is that this incense now is identified with Unas, and that is how Unas goes into the sky. So you have basically now near, so you do all of this near Unas, senether, so that he shall come, Unas, near you, the scent of the gods. Okay, so that's how this works. It's an incense is basically a way to send up the spirit of the Ka spirit of Unas, or the Ka force of Unas into the sky. So that's why I just wanted you. That was the detail I wanted to show you in Pyramid Test 269, and I think that was all I wanted to show for this. There's one other thing here. This is the word for the yonder. The yonder is basically the beyond, the other side. And so this is how the ancient Egyptians used that. They say ta pef. Pef means that, ta means land. So that land is what we call in English the yonder. Yeah, so this is another thing. And then we get to pyramid text 270. So 270 is now talking to the ferryman. And the ferryman, if you remember the moon, in in this part of the phase. So we have you have the summer solstice, you have the sun rising into Leo, right? Which is Leo is here. There's Orion. There's Canis Major with Sirius. There's Taurus, and here's Cancer, and here's Gemini, and here's Aries. And this is just for orientation. So here's the moon, and of course the moon moves every day along the ecliptic, and so I just want to explain real quick that the movement of the moon along the ecliptic is something that happens day by day. So for each day, the moon moves a certain slice of sky towards the east, but on a daily basis, in other words, if you follow the moon throughout the day, the moon moves obviously from east to west. So it rises in the east and it sets in the west. So these are two different motions. It's the daily motion, and then there's the monthly motion. The monthly motion is actually from west to east. And so that is basically a movement across the zodiac sign. So the moon is visiting the different stations on the ecliptic in a west to east fashion. And so that is why that is the particular motion that I think is referred to on the south wall of the antechamber. I'll explain to you why that is. I already mentioned it last time, but I'm going to show you the textual detail of it now, because as you can see, the moon in this phase of the lunar cycle is waning. So as it heads for the sun and it turns into new moon, the face of the moon gets ever smaller. So we start with full moon, and then we gradually wane the moon away, and the face is facing east, but the motion, the monthly motion, is towards the east. So it's opposite. The face is pointing one way, but the motion is pointing the other way. And the Egyptians have a name for that, and what they call it is face in the back. And that is what I wanted to show you. So that further is, of course, evidence that this journey here was supposed to go in this direction across the Milky Way. And what Unas is saying to the ferryman is, if you don't take me, I'm going to hitch a ride on the moon, on the wings of the moon, and do it this way. So there is a ferry, but then there's also the moon, and the two may in fact be the same. And we don't have to get into the evidence right now, but suffice it to say is that ferry is the sickle shaped moon. So here's now the word that I'm referring to. So it says resek means wake up in peace. So this is now Unas talking to the ferryman. Jet Medu, works to be spoken. Resek em hetep means wake up in peace. So he's being nice to the ferryman. And here's the ferryman's name, Heref Hath. Heref means his face. Hath means in his back or behind him, his face behind him. So this is how the ancient Egyptians expressed the idea of a moon that is moving along the ecliptic on its monthly cycle, and it's a waning moon. So, in modern times, we have myth, we have stories, we have storytelling, we have fiction, and then we have science and nonfiction, and we have separated those two things. We don't describe astronomy, scientifically speaking, in metaphorical terms or poetic terms, but the ancient Egyptians, to them, astronomy and poetry was the same, or metaphors were the same. That's how they described scientifically the sky, and this is a perfect example of it. So a waning moon along the ecliptic is basically is someone that has his face in his back. So it's a beautiful example how the language is not detached from a physical reality. This is physical reality. It's immanent, and that's of course what Jim Allen also writes in his book Middle Egyptian. So by the way, this is a good way for me to thank him. He's an amazing teacher. Everything I know about hieroglyphic, the fundamentals of it comes from James Allen, his book Middle Egyptian. It's a tough, it's something that when you study it yourself, it's a big book, and going through it is it's a lot of work, but you learn a ton. The frustrating aspect is once you get to the book, it does not necessarily mean you can translate hieroglyphic you still use, but it comes with practice. And the pyramid text, actually, surprisingly, even though people might think that's the hardest text, it is hard only with respect to what it means, but reading it, the words themselves, is actually fairly good way to learn hieroglyphic. And so this is what I would recommend, rather than going to New Kingdom hieroglyphic or even Ptolemaic, which is way more complicated. And the most beautiful, the most amazing literature comes from actually Middle Egyptian, which is close to Old Egyptian. So the pyramid text language is very similar to the language that was used in during the times of Middle Egypt. And of course, like I was saying, the pyramid texts of Unas were used in a tomb or tombs of the Middle Kingdom. So linguistically speaking, these were very, very close. Anyway, so what Jim Allen writes in Middle Egyptian, his book, he's saying that you cannot understand really what the gods of Egypt meant unless you understand they were immanent. In other words, the gods are the forces of nature. The nethers are the natures. They are the forces of nature. They don't send the forces of nature at a distance. They are the forces of nature. So when you have a metaphoric description like Heref Haf, that is a physical description, like a scientific observation of the actual entity that is being observed. Okay, that's how you have to read the language of the ancient Egyptians. Okay, long story short, so we have Heref Haf, and then he keeps addressing the ferryman. So Hetep, peace be with you, Ma Haf. And that is just another way of saying Heref Haf. So here's the face behind you, or behind him, his face behind him, and this being saying his sight behind him, just to underscore the fact that his eyes, his face, it's all in the back of his head. Then it says Hetep, be in peace, Meshenti. So now it's clarified again that we're talking about the ferryman. We're not talking about, just the moon, but the moon is the ferryman because it's mentioned it right here. Meshenti Pet. It's the ferryman of the moon. Hetep. So Unas is coming in peace. Meshenti Nu means the ferryman of the cosmic sea. Hetep in peace. The Meshenti Neteru, which is the ferryman of the gods. So this is not just a ferryman. This is the ferryman that ferries the gods across the cosmic sea. Hetep has come, Unas, near you. That Jat that you cross, Unas, him. Meshenti, with as the same way that you cross the gods. So Unas is basically trying to put himself to convince the ferryman that he is like the gods, and therefore the ferryman should accept Unas and ferry him across the Milky Way. Okay, and then I wanted to point out this is a word called, this is semaf. Semaf means his proximity. And this is just another way to underscore that Unas is when he talks to the ferryman, he is in his proximity. So there's semaf, there's mentioned again. So Unas is at the ferryman when he talks to him. Okay, we're almost done. I know this has been a long presentation, but I think it's worth to go through the details a little bit so you see the full background of what I'm trying to say. So now we get to this phrase where Unas is saying, "Ferryman, if you don't take me, I will basically ride on the wings of Jehuti, Thoth, basically." So he's saying, it says, "Item emek irek ja." So it means if you do not cross or help me cross, basically, irek means if you do not. So if you fail to if you fail to do the crossing, Unas will basically take Depi, Jenhu, and Jehuti, means the wing of Thoth. I think it's singular, so it's the wing, not the wings. So he will be Depi means on top of Jenhu, Jehuti. So he will be on top of the wing of Thoth. And then he will cross to the other side. Okay, and then finally we have the last two pyramid texts, and 271 and 272. 271, we have another cryptic mention of Mehit, and this is done in a slightly different way. So Unas is the one, and this is a strange word, which is again a clue that maybe something else was being hidden inside a Heka's insinuation. So we have Unas is the one, the Mehentita is the land swimmer. And he is emerging per she Unas. So he's coming out of the lake of Unas. But Mehenti, the land swimmer, of course, has Mehit in it. So Mehetta, Mehetita is Mehit, right? So there's another confirmation that Mehit is being invocated here, potentially. And then we have another word here, Zeshesh, and that is now again the double stitch. So because Mehit has to do with writing and the early administration in the kingdom, and so Zesh, of course, means to write. Zeshu are the writers, and it's hidden in this word, beautifully done, for the lotus. So the Egyptian Nile, otherwise called the Blue Lotus, is the word for that is Zeshesh or Zesheni, Zeshesh in this case, and there's the sign of the lotus. But if you think of this as a Heka magic, right? So you really have Mehit and Zeshu, which is Mehit guarding the riders. And so what could this mean in an interpretive way? Well, it means that Unas is literate now. He's literate with magic. He understands the power of writing. And this is how he's emerging into the sky. In order to be able to learn the spells, you have to be able to read, you have to be able to utter them, you have to be able to use the magic effectively. And that is synonymous almost with being able to read and write. And so that is maybe what's hidden in here, that Mehit, association with writing and archiving, is really the true origin of this idea of being a land swimmer that is coming out of the lake like a lotus, releasing Unas from the center of the lotus. It's beautiful poetry, and it's just a lot of fun, to see these deeper resonances that are hiding inside. Okay, so the next, here's a word that is probably familiar to a lot of people that go into the Dendera temple. They go down into the crypt and they see the lotus bulb. Some people think it's the electric light bulb, which of course I don't think so. But from that experience, you might know Heru Sematawi, which is Horus, the uniter of the two lands. And I just wanted to point out that this Sematawi is mentioned here in the pyramid text even. So here's Zema. Zema, here's the sign, the biliteral symbol that encompasses those two consonants. So Zema, or those three rather, Zema so it's a triliteral actually. Zema, and then Zemai, Taui is the two lands. So I just wanted to mention that this is mentioned here. And then we continue on. So he's the uniter. So this is basically the image that you're getting is now that the sun is rising. And it's summertime, you have the flood, you have inundation, the lands are united again, right? Because of the Nile. The Nile is flowing again. And now you have this idea of Unas rising with the sun, uniting the land. Chaos is wiped away. We have order, we have cosmic order restored. The cyclical eternity is continuing as planned, as it always does. And so that is the picture now. You have the Demeji, Mayutev. So it's basically the south and the north are reunited. Here's the Ka, here's the bull. So these are the southern emblems, so to speak. There's Mutef. So this basically what this is saying is that there's two hills. There's the vulture and there's the stork on the other side, and these two hills are kind of like the two lands, and they're being united because of the river. And now this is an important piece here, because now we're talking about the ladder. So the ladder is what, there's two ways to interpret this ladder. It's also mentioned on the north wall. It's mentioned a little bit earlier around this column 13, not on the south wall, but on the opposite side. And it's perfectly placed because the ladder is basically how you get up next to the Milky Way. And it could be the Milky Way itself too. It could be just yet another way to refer to the Milky Way besides the quartz rain and besides the boulevard of stars that we saw earlier on the south wall. So here we have stand up. Aha means may stand the Jetu, which is the two jet pillars, and of course jet, a sign of Orion, Osiris rather. And so this is now potentially related to, again, to the Duat and the Milky Way next to it. So may stand up the two Jetu, the two jet pillars, and then may descend high, having descended the Hejetu, which are now what are they called? The spokes of the ladder, so to speak. Not the spokes, but I can't remember the word right now. Anyways, you have the two ladders, the two poles of the ladder, if you wish, the frame of the ladder, and then you have the footsteps, basically, which are shown here. It's beautifully done. So it's explicitly saying, stand up to two, put the steps down, and then you have a ladder. And then the ladder is actually mentioned by word, which is here, which it says Maret, and there's the sign of the ladder with the spokes and the two Jetu, right? So it's explicit. There's really no reason to, there's no need for guesswork. It's explicitly mentioned what is happening supposedly in the sky. So in this case, a ladder is supposed to be constructed for Unas to use. And that is getting close to the end of this text in terms of the things I want to mention. And then we have Pyramid Text 272, which is the last bit. And the main thing about Pyramid 272 is this, again, this idea of the portal, and the portal just disappeared. So let's bring it back. Here's the portal. So the Arerut, and in my reconstruction, the antechamber is basically, the entire antechamber is a recreation of the Sphinx statue, okay? So it's in the netherworld, we have this lion that is guarding the exit from the underworld. And so to me, this Arerut with the corner here, it makes sense that they have the word for lion embedded in it. It's a special word for a portal. It's not the only way to refer to doors or a portal. In fact, in the other parts of the pyramid text, you actually have two door leaves. And we're going to get into the mention of those portals, or the doors rather. But it's interesting that in this entire context, this word is chosen, Arerut. And I think the reason why it's chosen is because it both refers to a corner portal and it has the word lion within it, Ru. In this case, I don't see the double stitch. I don't see the line symbol close by. I don't see another word that would use it. So I am not that sure that it's related to the concept of the Sphinx, the statue, the lion, etc., etc. So, you know, there's different gradations in terms of Heka and when you can believe there's intent and when there may not be intent. So, but my purpose in this presentation is to point out all the clues, all the evidence, and then I'll have you have to decide what you find convincing and what's not convincing. So anyway, so this concludes the review of the south wall of the antechamber. As you can see, this is pretty rich. there's a lot in this just one wall. And remember, this is just one out of 4 walls and 2 gables. And then you have still the sarcophagus chamber. So that's why it's important to keep the overall concept of the pyramid text always in the back of your mind, so you can map all of this onto that larger map. And once you do that, this is the best way for me to learn this also, is when I have a bigger map in my mind, then I can place all of these little details onto that map, and then it's easier for me also to remember. Okay, well, that's it. Long presentation. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, I'm going to leave the comment section open so you can ask questions if you need to.